Welcome to Wordy Wednesday. Well, I thought today we would do something that maybe we should have done from the beginning, but we're doing it now, and that is talk about the history of the English language. What is it, the stuff that we speak today? Where did it come from? And personally, I find this very interesting. I hope you will too, and we'll be right back. As we know, our language comes from Britain, a little island, the other side of the Atlantic, and it was their language for about 1,500 years before it was our language. We inherited this. We were once British people. So their linguistic history is our linguistic history. So let's talk a little bit about Britain. Now, as I said, island, far, far away. It was undoubtedly part of the European continent at one time. And we have a lot of evidence of this, even though it would have separated into an island before the time at which the English-speaking peoples were writing any histories. But there are some things that we know. We know that at certain times of the year there are sandbars that appear in the English Channel, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to realize that if sandbars appear in something that short, you probably could have walked across there. There was a land bridge at some time. And frankly, today, people swim the English Channel for sport. So, not that unreasonable to realize that people were probably able to go from the European continent to Britain by land. They wouldn't have even needed seafaring skills. My goodness, they could have just stripped down and swum across. So, we had the island populated by a group of people who spoke Celtic languages. And there were a number of indigenous, hard to say indigenous, who knows how long they were there, and who knows if someone was there before them. We don't. Celtic languages, Welsh and Gaelic and Cornish, it's got Manx. They are being brought back, by the way. This is just a little piece of trivia, the last Cornish speaker, native Cornish speaker, died just before the 20th century. So it was a language that was spoken as a native language right up until, our grandparents' day. So we've got a whole bunch of Celtic speakers on this island. Great. So what does that mean? Well, this was not the center of the known world. They're not even close. The center of the Western world at that time was Rome. And the leader of the Roman world, the big superpower of the West, was Julius Caesar. And in about 55 BCE, Julius Caesar made some forays into England, got some tribute, spoke with leaders, chieftains, their kaisers, and he recorded this. One of the great things about the Romans is they wrote everything down. They loved records, and they were a very literature-happy people. Fortunately for us, because that literature survives. But Caesar didn't stay. About 10 years later, actually about 8 years later, because it was like 43 BCE. Oh, and let me just throw this out. I do not use BCAD because they are culturally biased terms. I use BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, Common Era, because they are not culturally biased. They are BC comes from before Christ, and AD comes from Anno Domini, meaning the year of our Lord. These are decidedly Christian terms, and they are non-inclusive. So I prefer to go with BCE and CE, and if you find yourself dealing with history in an academic forum, you are going to find that this is the norm. So, 43 BCE, Claudius invades, and he stayed. Well, not him personally, but his army stayed. And the Romans were in Britain from 43 BCE to 410 CE. So they had around 450 or so years of occupation in Britain. And there is a great deal of history in Britain, archaeological history, that goes back to Roman coins. The metal detectorists in the UK are turning up Roman coins all the time. They are finding Roman mosaics. Bath, which is something that we're going to deal with in book club tomorrow, was a Roman town. The Romans were a presence for 450 to 500 years. Well, let me see, what was that? 757, 467 years. They were a presence in Britain. And eventually they left. The army officially moved out. There were still many Roman Britons on the scene. And this is just common sense. An army is in there for 500 years. The soldiers are going to end up marrying into the local population. Eventually, it's going to hit a point where the Roman soldiers are not really Roman anymore. They are Britons. Whatever Roman blood they had just passed off into the great beyond 400 years earlier. So when the Roman invaders left, you had a Romano-Briton people and Celtic peoples. And within a few years, the usual given date for the Anglo-Saxon migration is 450 CE. So that's only 40 years after the Romans left. So 450 CE, the Anglo-Saxons come in. As I say, likely they came in from a land bridge that would have been extant for at least some portion of the year. They were a Germanic-speaking people, and obviously our language is a Germanic language, but they were a people of Northern Europe, probably of Germanic descent, and they moved in to Britain. And at this point, there was another factor that moved into Britain along with them, and that was Christianity. With Christianity comes a sense of sort of general societal cohesion and literacy. These are people who had the Roman alphabet. They had literature. They had a language that they spoke, different from what the Anglo-Saxons spoke. They would have been speaking Latin. It would have been liturgical Latin, but it would have been their version of Latin. So we have an Anglo-Saxon people who have moved in, the Celtic people who were there before, and missionaries. Basically, that's what it was. The church would send priests and monks in, and they had bishops, and they were converting the masses and So, how is it that the Anglo-Saxons, who, by the way, did not call themselves Anglo-Saxons, they probably called themselves Angli or Saxons or Saxoni, Saxes, would have been Angli or Saxes, they would have called themselves, moved in. So what happens next? Well, this is something that there's a lot of scholarly division over. There are a lot of people who maintain that the Anglo-Saxons wiped out the Celtic people. Well, of course they wiped out the Celtic people because we don't speak Celtic. And there are very few Celtic words in our vocabulary. They say brat and baby are two we got from Welsh. Other words, personally, I think the DW words, there are very few of those in our language. Dwarf, dwindle, dwell, those, and the DW sound is common in Irish Gaelic. So I think those may have been words that came in from the people who preceded the Anglo-Saxons, but nevertheless, 5 words in a language, no. We do, however, have some things in our language that are decidedly Celtic. If I were speaking any other Proto-Germanic language, if I were speaking any other Indo-European language, if I were speaking any other language on earth, I would not say, I am doing something. I would say, for example, I speak, not I am speaking. And any of you who have studied a foreign language know this is true. This is a uniquely English manner of phrasing. It's a grammatical form that is ours and ours alone, almost. I am speaking. I am writing. We do this all the time. We don't say, I speak, I write, I eat. We might do that to describe something we do on a continuous basis, but not what we are doing now. That is something that is Welsh. In Welsh, you would say, I am on the writing. I am on the singing. I'm a-doing this, I'm a-doing that. That's Welsh. So we do have a very major fundamental influence on our language that is Celtic. People are starting to see this now. There was a time when that was a really, really controversial assertion that, yes, we didn't pick up vocabulary from these languages, but we did pick up some fundamental grammar. All right, so let's go back to our Anglo-Saxons. Did they wipe out the Celtic people? That was believed for a long time, that the Anglo-Saxons came in and slaughtered everybody. Well, no. No. First of all, that scale of warfare would leave serious traces. There's no way around it. Archaeologists would have had battlefields, and you can't just exterminate an entire people without leaving a trace. You can't. Certainly not with whatever weapons they had in 450 CE. At that point, it would have been bows and arrows and spears and swords. They couldn't have just dropped a bomb, the people are gone and they move in. So no, that didn't happen. It was a process of assimilation. However, the Anglo-Saxons obviously prevailed linguistically and culturally. Does this mean there were no conflicts? No, of course, there were almost certainly conflicts, but it was not the slaughter that was formerly believed. So It was more of a peaceful migration than an invasion. Why would the Anglo-Saxon languages take over? Well, for a start, they were part of the Proto-Germanic language family, which meant they had been around for a long time. They were probably simpler, easier to use. And who knows why one language takes over instead of another. But it did. We know there were 4 dialects of Anglo-Saxon that we have evidence of. There could have been many more. There was Mercian, Kentish, Northumbrian, and West Saxon. Those are the 4 biggies. And because we have literature from those languages, we have writing, scripture, as in to scribe, from those languages. And we also know that the languages, these dialects, were spoken simultaneously between about 450, when the Anglos and the Saxons migrated to Britain, and 1066, when the Normans came in. So this is that 500-year period we're looking at, or 600-year period we're looking at. 450, 1066, that's our window when Anglo-Saxon became the dominant language family. Now, I say family because there were 4 dialects. The one that took over was the West Saxon. So this happened for a very simple reason. History sometimes does turn on the actions of one individual, and in this case, that individual was Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, West Saxons, and he eventually became king of all of England or Britain or whatever little group they called themselves. He became king of everybody. He was the boss of you. And Alfred was very pro-literacy. He was an intellectual himself. He wanted to see literacy spread. He encouraged the development of writing and literature and schools. He was religious. He encouraged the church to come in and educate. And as a consequence, the literature, the writing, the scriptures, the stuff that was written down was mostly written in West Saxon. So that's why that is the language that dominates. That, oh, by the way, that's Old English, plain and simple. Old English was something that didn't exist before 450 and became Middle English after the time of the conquest. That's the usual date that's given. So then William comes in from France in 1066, and suddenly we've got a period of about 150 years where the ruling elite of society are speaking French. Are the people speaking French? No, not even close. Why? They're not kings. But it doesn't last. And the reason it doesn't last is just plain common sense. The average, the average wheat farmer is not going to begin speaking French because the king does. Eventually, the king is going to have to learn to speak English so that he can communicate with the people he is ruling. And this is what happened. Eventually, official documents, had begun to be written in both English and French, and then eventually just English. And at this point in the language, when it is post-conquest, in other words, after 1066, the language is becoming comprehensible to us. This is the language of Chaucer, which, as we all know from high school, that with a good gloss, we can read it, we can look at it, we can pull out the words. but it's not the language of Beowulf, for example. Beowulf is Old English. So that's where we are at. We go from the Celtic languages to the Romano-Briton period where Latin was spoken, although not by the local population. By the way, interestingly enough, we as English speakers did not pick up Latin from that period. Is it possible that the Roman soldiers in Britain picked up the local language? Sure. Why would the local population not have picked up Latin? Who knows? But Latin comes into our vocabulary as English speakers at a later date and from different sources. Just interesting little fluke. So we've got Celtic speakers, we've got the Romano-Briton Latin speakers, then we've got the Anglo-Saxon speakers, the 4 dialects. Eventually, West Saxon emerges as the primary dialect, primarily because of Alfred the Great, and he lived from 848 to 899. Second half of the 9th century is when Anglo-Saxon emerges as the dominant language, and everybody is speaking some form of Old English by the time the Normans come. Now, Old English, in the meantime, between the time that the Romans left and the Normans came, so we got our little 600-year window, Vikings were coming, and they were strongly influencing our language too. They were simplifying it. We lost all our case endings, almost all our case endings. We have very few. And we lost gender. Those of you who've studied Romance languages know that, some words are masculine, some words are feminine. Oh, it's not just Romance languages either. We lost all that. Scandinavian influence. They came in as traders. They networked in with the local population, and they probably began speaking a sort of pidgin dialect, a simplified Old English, because they were not native speakers, and that's the one that caught on. So it simplified our language. So we owe them a great deal because in many ways our language is quite simple compared to others. So we have the Anglo-Saxon period, and then the Normans come. We have a couple hundred years of French, and then bang, back to English. But English has changed by then, and it has become much, much closer to the language we speak. It had become the language of Chaucer. And then a couple hundred years later, it's the language of Shakespeare. And a couple hundred years later, it's the language of rap music. So that in a nutshell. And mind you, I have simplified this. I have just given you sort of 2,000 years of linguistic history in 20 minutes. So you got to know this was just a real down and dirty explanation. But it's important that we know the background, because one of the things I want to discuss next time is subject and tense agreement. And one of the things that we're going to get into is why it is okay to use the word they or them when you're speaking about a single individual. For example, we have our Peacock giveaway. Oh, good. This is going to let me mention my Peacock giveaway. We have the Peacock Base giveaway this week. And when the winner is chosen, I will let them know. The winner is one, them is more than one. Why is it okay? That's something we're going to discuss next week. But in order to do that, we have to introduce Old English. Old English, FYI, had a third-person singular non-gender specific pronoun. So it was a pronoun that you could use describing he or she or them, or he or she or him or her. And it was thon. THON. And we know that it was that sort of aspirated thon, not the unaspirated thon, as in marathon, thon, because all the rest of our pronouns have that aspirated thon, the, this, then, them. So we have the word. Personally, I'd like to see us bring it back, because we need a word that we can use without being gender specific. There was a time when, if I were to say, I will let the winner know, and then he will get back to me, that you defaulted to the male, which is ridiculous when half the population is female, but there you have it in a nutshell. So, in order to get to gone next week, we need to talk about Old English this week. Celts, Romans, Anglo-Saxons, French, Celts, Romans, Anglo-Saxons with Viking incursions. That's important. Then French, and then us. It's just sort of a logical progression. And in general, it was a largely peaceful progression. Yes, when William the Bastard came over from Normandy, there was a war, but it was a single conflict, and that was the end of it. It wasn't a prolonged conflict that resulted in the extermination of peoples. It was an assimilation instead of an extermination. And that's the important thing to remember, because in a situation of assimilation, you get little bits and pieces from the other cultures coming in too. And we can't discount the little bits and pieces we got from the Celtic people who were here first. As I say, our grammar. I am speaking to you, as opposed to I speak to you. Critical when you think of how difficult it would be for you to go through a single day without using that grammatical form. You realize that it's fundamental to the English language. Then we have the French coming in. We acquired a huge vocabulary from them. They did not really influence the way we speak. The Vikings, of course, came in, got rid of all the superfluous case endings, simplified our language beautifully, and that's how we have what we have today. All right. I mentioned the peacock vase. The giveaway is still going on this week. As you already know, we have another giveaway already waiting in the wings, that beautiful Halloween tidbit tray from Colleen Staver. So, enter the giveaways. And I will see those of you who wish to come along to book club Thursday night. And for the rest of you, I'll see you Friday morning. All right, have a great day.